Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Cities Skylines. Today's episode we are just simply working on getting some of the residential areas a little bit more flushed out, some details, which basically comes down to fencing off some yards, getting the building placement a little bit more closely knit together, and just overall making the area get tied down and feel a little bit more grounded when it comes to fitting into the landscape. There are a lot of kind of barren spots in the town currently, and this episode we just go ahead and just add some details along here. Initially, as you know, the main downtown area up there at the top of your screen has some more row homes. I wanted that to kind of slowly transition out as we get farther away from the downtown area, and to do that you just simply just slowly do a couple row homes, start spacing them out, and then you start doing just normal single family homes right there. We are adding a gas station on this side of town. We do have one up by the train yard, but to me it made sense to have one on the entrance and kind of the exit point of town, not so much in the main street area, just simply due to initially, you know, this town was kind of built maybe before, you know, there were kind of gas stations or needs for one, and so they're more historical buildings kind of related to the downtown sector. It's still a really small town, and really that is kind of the overall goal for this build so far in this series. I'm trying to keep it relatively simple because me and Cities Skylines, we don't really get along, so I have to try and take my time with this. As you notice, there's a whole bunch of white. This is almost all going to get covered up this episode. We're going to be adding more homes down in the lower section as well, kind of off screen. We're going to change the industrial sections of the town up a little bit. We're going to opt for a little bit more of just plain warehouse storage units, kind of sporadically spread out through some sections of the town. I've also changed the industrial area by the rail yard, which we might get some panning shots here at the end of today's build. And you know, this is just to make it look a little bit more quaint and run down, where maybe this isn't where factories are, but maybe you can still do some bulk storage and still kind of ship some things out, almost like as a central hub area or just a stopping point along, say, a normal route. Doing some fence work around here. We're going to also get a road passing through here just so that it can look like it's a more usable road, though you'll notice at some point some traffic prefer to use this section as a normal passover rather than the main street right above here. And to fix that, I end up just kind of blocking off certain types of traffic. I think that's a pretty good, straightforward fix. We won't block off, I think, any of the large trucks from using it, but we do, I think, block off the smaller traffic vehicles and try and just overall make the thing work. We haven't finished detailing this out. In fact, I think next episode I'm gonna go ahead and try to throw in a little bit more light industrial details, storage yards, little miscellaneous things such as that, and hopefully that ties the town in a little bit more together. Currently, if you look at our bottom needs, it's asking for a lot of residential. By the end of this episode, it's actually going to try and push more towards industrial. So we might have to add a little bit of that kind of at the the exterior of like the southern portion of town, maybe even towards the right side. I also want to, I think next episode, basically finish up the rest of this town and call this place done. This town still needs a name, so if you guys have any name suggestions, do let me know in the comments down below. We're also going to be copying some of the little bushes and kind of ground clutter from earlier sections of the build just so we can quickly get them placed in. I don't want to do too much shrubbery kind of along here. It does make sense kind of around an industrial area simply due to it's almost used to kind of cover up some of the fence work, some of the building shape in general, just to make it look a little bit more nice. Other than that, I kind of want to keep it kind of barren elsewhere when it comes to shrubs, because it is considered winter. We are kind of building this as if this was the last snowfall and it's kind of going away. So hence why the roads are clear, hence why there are some trees without any snow and some trees with still snow. Mainly due to the lack of good snowy tree variety. That's kind of what we're running into a lot of the time. It's just kind of keeps the balance, and you know, there is some place for some greenery still, in my opinion. Greenery in cities just kind of make the whole thing look far more nice, and you know, it's a good framework in general to keep following regardless. So as we continue down into the lower section of the valley, this is some residential, but also maybe a bit of industrial closer to the opposite side of the school, maybe just a factory or two is where I want that. And of course we have our gas station, but there's also a small church in this lower section. Can't have a small town without a small church, of course. And you can see here placing down some more homes in that somewhat close grid-like pattern that you might find in your standard small village. Now I am, you know, this is somewhat European inspired, but as a person from America, I doubt I could really do it complete justice, and I'm not really referencing anything particular when it comes to the building style or theme. I'm usually just mostly winging it at this point, which is fine, but I do apologize if this is not 100% realistic or what you kind of expect out of a European town. I guess I am kind of bringing a little bit of an American twist here and there, which is to be expected as someone who hasn't been really out of the country. At this point, more homes. A lot more homes have been added off camera to try and just increase the density a little bit, but now we just want to try and start dividing a lot of these yards with some detail. Hedges is a very good way to do this. You can section off each yard. You can then add other details between the kind of land line as you go through different yards. But I don't want to keep using just hedges everywhere, right? So part of the way through here, we'll switch over to a small wooden fence type. We will switch to a more standard wooden fence type as well. So initially, I'm kind of just roughing in a lot of these shapes, not trying to be overly exact, because from a distance, it really doesn't matter. These are more guides for where I want the tree lines to kind of stop. If you guys have ever gone through like a small town or suburby area and actually looked at how many trees there are, you'd be really surprised at how dense it can be. Not saying it's always the rule, but even in my small town where I grew up, I can't think of really anyone's home that had any less than, say, 3 trees in their yard. I mean, it's just a lot of trees everywhere. People like to climb a lot of trees growing up, so it kind of just makes sense to have these. Hedges, to me, are just kind of a more European flair for boundaries for yards. I don't really get to see that much here in America, or at least in the parts that I've been in West Virginia and also in Maryland here, but I'm sure there's probably a bunch of communities somewhere in America that you prefer hedges rather than fences. But here, hedges, they're green, it's cool. My favorite color is green, so that's what we're doing. And the cool thing is when you zoom out over the city, you'll see me do that a lot this episode, because I really like to see kind of the overall picture and how things are looking from afar, and I constantly kind of check that as I go through. Is just how neatly it defines the border at that point. In fact, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Ostriv, if you guys have seen my series on that, in that it just forms this border where the dense greenery of the natural forest that would surround this town kind of ends, and it just slowly blends inward, and it's just a really nice look that I enjoy. So here's some fence work. We're even going to combine some fences with some of the hedges And even then, the fences don't necessarily even have to line up perfectly, because again, these trees that we're going to be adding in a second are really going to cover up a lot of the quick and dirty aspects of these. Definitely want to add some fences along this cliff edge. It's kind of an important thing to do, in my opinion. And there's even little pathways going between some city streets here, so it's good to keep that open from fences, almost like it's a normal kind of footpath alleyway cutting through. That's always nice looking in my eyes. So you'll notice some of these homes are getting a full fenced-in yard. Some of them are just getting a back fenced-in yard. Some of them are just fenced off in odd angles, maybe just in between two homes, maybe just one side of the house, and you know, that's just to keep a variety up. Whenever you're doing kind of mundane work like this, it's for your own sanity almost, to try and just think of as many variations of the same thing as you can. Not only will that keep that visually interesting for the people watching, but also keep it visually stimulating for you when you're actually making the subject. So that's something I would suggest doing. Here we are starting to add a little bit more of the tree variety throughout the town, and this is going to just make the whole thing feel a little bit more finished than it has before up to this point. It's kind of like the final bit of detail, not only to cover up ugly spots, but simply to just bring the whole thing together and finish tying it into the landscape. We do that with the rocks on the cliff faces, and we do that with trees here at this point. Also, it's a good way to build up the tree variety for the region. We have a lot of tree variety to choose from. Granted, due to the landscape and the season, we can't use a lot of it, but it's a good way to introduce some variety in ways so that you have the potential to use it elsewhere and it still ties into the region. A lot of evergreens here, not many broadleaves. Trying to keep that down. If we do use a normal broadleaf tree, it's usually the bare variety, which is perfectly reasonable. Here, making sure that the trees kind of blend, some of course with the normal full snow covered, some of them half covered, and then some of them with no snow, and that's just to keep tying everything together. And I placed so many trees this episode. I place them one at a time. I do keep my brush settings relatively high so I can kind of do broad sweeping strokes. At the edge of town, we can kind of increase the brush size just to kind of get down a lot more trees quickly. But every tree in between homes or in these little tucked in areas back here are generally hand placed. We also hand place a lot of rocks simply due to I don't necessarily like the texture or how Cities Skylines usually handles a lot of cliff textures. To me, it looks like a texture is really stretched, low resolution. So that's just something I generally dislike looking at. We are also going to be trying to use a lot of these shrubs from that one section of town up there to kind of signal where there might be a little bit more of a retention for ground surface, right? Because if you have slopes, which this town has a lot of them, you want to use green shrubs, kind of evergreen or some heavy root type items to hold that ground together to avoid your general slipping of the terrain. So we're gonna go ahead and finish today's episode here. I know it's probably a pretty short one, but it took a decent amount of time to actually place down all these trees and little details for the yards, and hopefully you guys get to see and enjoy how we go about doing this kind of by hand. So with that, thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys are enjoying Cities Skylines, feel free to subscribe to my channel for more creative goodness such as this. Hit that like button, leave a comment down below on what you might want to see in the series next, and I will see you all in the next video.